Hey everyone! So, before you ask, yes, I did get on the Less Than Famous panel, and yes, I am extremely excited to be going to VidCon, but I am going to be doing a big life update video later on in a few days or maybe next week, because there are just like 1,000,001 things going on in my life, and I feel like I could share those things with you. But this video is a response to Rosianna's video about colonialism and partition and gaps in education. In her video, Rosianna talks about partition, which is in 1947 when India and Pakistan split into two different countries. Before, they were both called India and they were both under the British Empire. So on August 15th and 16th, they split into two countries. August 15th is India's Independence Day and August 16th is Pakistan's Independence Day. And that created a lot of strife and a lot of pain for a lot of people. It split families up, and all of a sudden one country was one religion majority and the other was a different religion majority, and that created a lot of pain for a lot of people. But I honestly cannot speak on the partition very well, so I am going to focus on the other aspect of Rosianna's video, which is the fact that she only learned about the partition very recently and how much pain it caused very recently. And I'm going to start this off with a story. So a few weeks ago, I was on the phone with my mom and we were talking about Gandhiji and Indian history and revolution and all of that stuff, and I happened to mention the rebellion that happened in 1857 of Indian soldiers against the British government that was ruling over them. And when I talked about it, I called it the Sepoy Mutiny, because that's what I learned about it in school. I had an American public school education, and in world history class there was a paragraph about the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. And my mom called it the first revolution. She called it the first Indian Revolution against the British government. She had a very different spin on it because she learned about it in India. Yes, she had a slightly British-tinged education and she went to an English-speaking school, but still she was learning about it in independent India, and she was learning about it with Indian teachers, so their perspective was a lot more personal and a lot more knowledgeable about the whole event. I ended up really learning about it through pop culture, Indian pop culture to be specific. And Rosianna touches on a very interesting phenomenon in this video of schools only touching on very specific points in history. And for me, it was World War II and the Civil War and the American Revolution, basically, and America's involvement in all three of those things. That is what my history classes kept going back to. And for Rosianna, one of these three things was the Victorian era. But it wasn't the Victorian era of the rest of the world. It was very specifically the Victorian era of Great Britain, of the English people, and Scottish and Welsh and Irish probably, but primarily the English people in the Victorian era. And honestly, England really benefited from the Victorian era. They were ruling the world, quite literally. That saying, the sun never sets in the British Empire, that came from the Victorian era. And India was considered the crown jewel of the Victorian Empire. And when I say India, I mean India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, because they were all considered one country at that point. When she learned about the Victorian era, she learned about Queen Victoria and all of her children who eventually created World War I. But that's what she learned about. She learned a very Eurocentric and UK-centric version of the story when the entire world was being affected by it. And obviously every single part of the world has a different perspective on this. So it makes total sense that Rosianna would not have learned about an Indian's experience in India of the Victorian era. And it makes sense that she didn't learn about the partition because after World War II, England itself was trying to put itself back together. And the partition happened in 1947, right after World War II. for that very reason, actually. But when I watched the video, I couldn't help but be a little bit angry because I know about the partition, and not because of my school education, but because I've researched it myself. Whenever we had an independent project to do in school, I purposely made it about India because I wanted to learn so much more about it. And I wanted to learn about the partition and what caused it and why it happened. And I still don't have a definitive answer. Everyone you ask has a different answer. Many people say Gandhi created partition and is the reason why partition happened. Many people say it was certain leaders in the Muslim community who wanted their own country and wanted to have a Muslim majority country. And many people say it was the British government that was governing over them until independence. It's a very difficult event to unpack, and I felt angry because I had attempted to unpack it, and I had learned about it, and I knew about the pain, and it felt ridiculous to me that someone would not be fascinated by and interested in this subject the way I was. But as she was talking, I realized she had never even heard of the word partition, really, with the capital P, in terms of 1947 August. She had zero basis for it. My grandparents lived through the partition. They saw violence. They saw everything that happened. And I had every reason to be interested in this topic because I had the basis for knowledge to be curious. And it's a total shame that not everyone has that basis for knowledge, because everyone deserves the chance to be curious about it, and everyone deserves the chance to research it for themselves and find their own answers and come to their own conclusions about something. And I had the resources to do that because I knew about this subject. This is why perspective matters so much, and this is why I brought up the fact that my mom and I were talking about this rebellion that happened in 1857 in two completely different ways. It's because perspectives are completely different in different parts of the world, and perspectives are different depending on what happened to you personally, and perspectives are different based on what is in your textbooks. Because I read the word mutiny while my mother reads the word war for independence, and that gives us two completely different tales of the same thing. It's like how in the north of the United States, the Civil War is talked about in one way, while in the South, it's talked about in a completely different way. It's very difficult to divorce yourself from your perspective when you're teaching someone else about something. It's very difficult. And that shows through in curriculums and in syllabi. And it's the reason why I think representation is so important. It's because if you grew up the way Rosianna did in a British education system, and you ended up living there for the rest of your life, and your kids went to the same schools and learned the same things, you would never think that the world worked any differently than the way the history book taught it. But luckily, we have this beautiful thing called the internet, and we have resources that our parents and our grandparents could have only dreamed of having. We have voices being heard that were never, ever heard before, and were never thought to be heard, because people didn't know that their voices existed a lot of the time. People didn't realize that other perspectives existed, and I think that's what Rosianna is grappling with in this. It's the realization that her education, while excellent, wasn't enough and wasn't the only perspective out there, and that the other perspectives that are out there and the other truths that exist are so much bigger than one could have ever imagined. And this is why I think representation is so important. We need to show all of these perspectives in as much of the media as we can, so that no one can ever say that they didn't know something existed. No one can ever be truly ignorant about something. Or if they are, it's because they choose not to research it. But at least they are given the chance to be curious about it. Not everyone needs to be an expert in everything. I don't think that's helpful, and I don't think expecting that of other people is realistic in the slightest. But if as many perspectives as humanly possible were represented in as much of the media as possible, we could learn so much, and we could give so many people the chance to be curious about things they never knew they could be curious about. Yeah, I think that is it. I still haven't completely formed my thoughts on this. I have been grappling with this video and my response to it for 2 weeks, and I still haven't completely finished my thoughts, which is why this is so unscripted and so full of ums. But that is it for this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope it was helpful. I don't know how much sense it made, but hopefully it made sense to you. But yeah, of course, check out Rosianna's video, which is very interesting, and research the Partition if you would like. And I have a couple of films that I know of that are really great introductions, like very light, gentle introductions into the Partition and things like that. So if you want recommendations, let me know and then I will give them to you. Otherwise, that is it for this video. Thank you to Rosianna for inspiring this video and just being overall wonderful. She's doing Space Camp right now, which is kind of her version of making really regular videos, and like videos very often in kind of a confined space of time. And it's amazing and I love it. So thank you, Rosianna, for being wonderful. And thank you all so much for watching. Links to everything in the description, and I will see you guys next time. Bye! That was hard. That was hard. But I did it! I did it. I did it. Yeah.